Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides so we can get started. Okay, can everyone see that slide there? Okay, thanks for the heads up. A couple more chats here. Okay. Well, welcome to Indigenizing Your Curriculum, Culture, and Customs with Paty Ruas, Theresa Alfonso-Mendez, and Geneva Alfonso-Mendez. We're just so excited to be here with you in this learning space. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Paty, Theresa, and Geneva, although there's so many things I could tell you about these brilliant women and leaders who have an incredible impact at Hilltop Children's Center. Paty, pronouns she, her, is an early childhood educator of color and now mentor teacher who has been in this field for more than 15 years. Originally from Brazil, Paty brings intentionality, reflection, and dual language expertise to create warm, nurturing environments where each child feels valued, respected, and connected. Through Hilltop's Educator Institute, she supports early learning professionals and scaffolding social justice into their work with young children. In her free time, she can be found dancing, singing, or writing. Geneva, pronouns she, her, is an early childhood educator who works with infants and toddlers at Hilltop Children's Center. There, she draws from child rearing practices and frameworks from a range of cultures, including her own, as a member of the Crow Nation in what is known today as present-day Montana. By leveraging and integrating Indigenous kinship practices, trauma-responsive care, dual language, and modern-day culture into her work, Geneva is able to challenge and provoke educators and children to dig deeper. Theresa, pronouns she, her, has served in many different roles over her 30+ years in early childhood education, including educator, mentor, teacher, program supervisor, consultant, and more. Originally from Montana on the traditional lands of her people, the Crow, Theresa has worked with an entire generation of children and has built up an entire workforce of early childhood leaders by using compassion, deep thinking, dual language, and anti-racism as the foundation for teaching and learning. At Hilltop, Theresa spends her time challenging educators, children, and families in ways that we can center joy, love, and social justice in our lives. And just a quick aside, I'm noticing folks are saying that they're not able to get the form open. No worries, I will resend you that link in just a few moments as we get started. So you can just put that aside for now. And I'd love for everyone to just take a moment and come into presence in whatever space you are in right now. Perhaps you're in your home, perhaps you're in an office, maybe you're in a car or other form of transportation. And just really come into your body. Notice your feet on the floor. If you feel safe and comfortable, I even invite you to close your eyes to help your body come into this space. Feel whatever surface you're on, holding your body, supporting you. And feel the energy of the earth connecting with you, holding you here. This earth that asks for our reciprocity, that invites us to give back and to care for her so that she may do the same for us. And we take this moment to recognize that we are on the land of the Duwamish, the Suquamish tribes of Seattle, of the Muckleshoot and Snoqualmie tribes of King County. We take this moment to recognize that we all sit on stolen land, that we've inherited a society and a nation built on the collective trauma of colonization and attempted genocide. We can see the consequences of this history play out in every act of injustice and oppressive system that exists today. And while it is true that we have all inherited this trauma, it is equally true that we have within each of us an enormous capacity to heal and to provide healing to each other. The strength of our ancestors and the wisdom of this universe lives within each of us. And we have a responsibility and an opportunity to connect with that strength and wisdom so that we may bring justice and restore Native sovereignty to our nation. So as you listen to and learn from Paty, Theresa, and Geneva today, you may feel strong emotions. You may feel past traumas triggered, a desire to flee or turn away from the challenge. And we want you to know that all emotions are welcome here. Your anger, your grief, that hopelessness, that feeling of it's too much. I don't know what to do. And we encourage you to believe that you can sit with these feelings. We challenge you to find a way to take care of yourself and also be able to lean in, stay in community with us today, so that we can all share the responsibility of collective healing and restorative justice. And our question for you today, as you listen and learn, and as you take this work back with you, is to ask yourself, how can I show up in my daily life and work in a way that honors the connection between me and all living things, in a way that supports all of us to thrive and to heal?
Okay, so thank you for the land acknowledgement, Becky. Always beautiful to hear your voice, share those words. I'm gonna take a moment to burn some sage, which is a medicine that I use to calm down, cleanse, and feel healthy. So, and take a moment. Thank you. All right, thank you.
Oh, I was gonna wait for the screen, but I was gonna introduce myself. Are we waiting for the PowerPoint? Sorry, I didn't see this screen share. I'll just go ahead and start. We wanted to kind of go over some of the common identifiers that you may hear when Indigenous people refer to themselves. In the US, you tend to hear American Indian, Indian, or Native American and Native. In Canada, some may refer to themselves as First Nations, First People, or Aboriginal. In the Arctic, they may refer to themselves as the Inuit, the Yupik, or Aleut. And then in Mexico and different parts of Central America and South America, they refer to themselves as Indigena, which is the Spanish word for indigenous. And oftentimes you also hear indigenous in reference to all indigenous people that may come from a land. You also may hear a specific tribal identity, which oftentimes is what many indigenous people like to refer themselves as. When Becky introduced Theresa and I, she referred to us as Crow. Sometimes this can get a little confusing when talking to indigenous people because you're unsure of which term you may feel comfortable talking or identifying them as. And I always say just ask and see what people are comfortable with. Oftentimes it's their tribal affiliations that they want to be referenced as. So we wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves and our identification, how we like to be identified. My name is Geneva Alfonso-Mendez. I usually identify myself as Indigenous, being that I am Mexican and Native American, Crow. But when I'm talking to my Native family or my Native community, I will refer to myself as Crow. Yeah. Whoever wants to go next to introduce.
Okay, I can go. So I am Theresa Alfonso-Mendez. When I am presenting myself, I do identify as my tribe as Crow, which Absaluga is what we call ourselves. Crow is the colonizer's word. So I do say Absaluga. Depending on which environment I'm in as well, I might refer to myself as Indigenous. Yeah.
And Paty, Ruas, my pronouns are she, her, and I recently learned the pronouns in Tupi language, which is Hae. And I am originally from Brazil. I was born and raised there. So I consider myself Latinx from South America and Indigenous. My tribe affiliation is Mebengroke, but the colonized term people use is Kayapos. And I think we're ready for the next slide, Becky.
All right, so I was gonna start off for our conversation today, giving a very brief history on boarding schools because it pertains to the learning story that we're gonna be discussing today. But it also kind of gives an understanding of the relationship between education and Indigenous people. This is gonna be very brief. There's a lot more to it than what I'll be sharing, but the creation of boarding schools was with its intent of assimilation into Western culture. The idea was to remove Indigenous children from their families, as kinship was a very important aspect in a lot of Indigenous communities. And this was to separate them from their cultural knowledge as well as just familial relationships, and sending them to schools that were hundreds of miles away from this family and away from their community, mixing them with different tribes intentionally so that they wouldn't be able to communicate with each other in their own languages. This caused a lot of language genocide as well as cultural genocide. A lot of the experiences that these children were having weren't the most pleasant. A lot of abuse and neglect. Some children never made it back home. Others were lucky enough to return to their families. This caused a lot of trauma that's passed down, intergenerational trauma that's still relevant in our recent generations. This is just one piece of Indigenous history that people, if you plan on incorporating an Indigenous culture into your classrooms, that you should know to be able to authentically talk about Indigenous cultures and knowledge. There are plenty of others as well, but this is one that I wanted to share as it connects to what we'll be talking about.
I was actually gonna share a little bit about on the others, enrolled versus unenrolled and what that actually means. So there are 573 tribes in the United States of America. And what enrolled means is someone who is acknowledged through the tribe through whatever criteria they have written for their membership. And they are acknowledged through that. Tribes have had treaties that show how they can be enrolled into their tribe. Some use blood quantum, some don't, but blood quantum is what has kind of made that unenrolled part very hard for people who may not meet those criteria. They're still descendants of Indigenous people, still carrying all that intergenerational trauma, but because of the being able to be enrolled or unenrolled, they're not able to access different resources to help get through that trauma. So I just wanted to share that as a part of understanding that people may not be an enrolled member, and but they still carry that culture, that tribe, the resiliency that they're continuing to be.
Yeah, and on the next slide, we're going to start diving a little bit more about curriculum and what does that look like. And Geneva and Theresa and I, we talk a lot about what do we want to talk, why are we here? What is the purpose of us being here presenting today and talking to you about those things? We just want to share really a small window of some of the work that the three of us do. But really the work is on a daily basis. And again, this is just like one fraction and one window of the daily, work that we do. And if you look at this picture and it says the roots, so I like to think about curriculum as a tree, and is a living, breathing organism. The roots connected to so many other things, and to be able to grow and to be part of the system, right? And we need to understand what is underneath, what is at the roots of the curriculum, the Indigenous curriculum that we are doing at school. And again, it's not a kind of Control-C, Control-V experience, right? And we really try to make sure we are not doing a tourist approach to looking at not only Indigenous celebrations, but any other kind of celebrations where it's just, it's just not intentional and it's not authentic. So the curriculum and the activities and the relationships and connections we want to build with children and families and among each other is an ongoing process. It's about building trust. It's also about educators having the willingness to sit and embrace discomfort and engage with children's curiosity. It's also about giving sovereignty to Indigenous voices and really thinking about curriculum as a way of healing is in a spiral. So in Tupi-Guarani, one of the many 3 languages that we speak in Brazil, Kwai-Sites is the way of looking about a spiral learning. So we keep going back to it and then relearning again and going back to it and relearning again. And I think Theresa is going to talk a little bit about the expectation of child behavior and the dominant culture expectation of children too.
Yeah, we do have the expectations, and I just wanted to share a little bit of like she said, this is just, I can only talk from my experience, my life story. We all have a different story. One of the things is not every Indigenous person is an expert on being Indigenous. It's just our own experience, and so I just kind of wanted to share, like, for myself growing up, what it was for me as a learner, as a child. I know that I learned through observation of things that were going on around me. I imitated a lot of things. There are a lot of storytelling, and also very hands-on. For me, I know that for the way that the children are involved around my people, it was, the children were just active members of the learning. It was very hands-on and very different than what Western learning is, where it's an instruction of knowledge. Here's information, take it, retain it. And usually it's, the process is testing, quizzes, things to show how much of that you retained, which is very different than the way that I'm going to say often Indigenous children learn. They're making those connections through morals and values, and they're acquiring that knowledge as opposed to being taught to them, like, here, take this knowledge. And it's just also structured around belief systems. And I just wanted to share that different view of what the behavior is in different cultures. But sometimes it's harder for someone who's being raised in that to learn the way inside in school. So when you're doing curriculum, just thinking about how do you engage that child, which is why I love being at Hilltop, because Reggio is very, very much on point with the children. It's led by the children, and we just facilitate. Yeah.
And alongside the roots, so if you can see on the next slide, some of the things that helps facilitate and give us support into doing curriculum that is authentic from the children and is authentic to our culture is one of the things is like anti-bias library, for example, is one way of doing it. And we also know that the written words are as important as the oral history that we pass along to them too. And I think there was a saying among my people that once our elder dies, that means, centuries of knowledge oral history has been die with them whenever we lose an elder. And I think I see that so much happening, and we want to keep it alive as much as I try to keep it alive, the stories that have been passing down to me as much as I can, and also what to share and when to share. There are things that are very personal to me, that are being passed along to me, especially spiritual knowledge from my dad and so that they are mine and I don't want to share, but there are the things that I'm willing to share. So also I keep that in mind too when I'm talking about my culture and or just sharing out oral history with my children. And just to talk a little bit about the pictures there. So yeah, so we try to build like an anti-bias library, and I try to bring books that are really were written by and illustrated by Indigenous people from different places. There's the second picture that says Letter to the White House. So again, this is an ongoing work. So it's a years long work, in the daily basis work. So at some point when we are talking about, that was, I think 2 years ago, elections, when the presidential elections happened here, we talk a lot about perceived power. And this is a classroom of 3 to 5 year olds, so preschool pre-K. And for me specifically, I think I see like authority and power in a colonized way. So I was trying to expand their thinking about what does it look like, someone that has authority and power. And I think it looked like to me the take from children during that time of the presidential elections were more about, well, then they own us, right? So this new president, this new vice president, they own us something. And so the letters to the president and vice president were more about focus on what are you going to do about basically climate change? What are you going to do about people that are, the racial injustice that's happening? So I think a lot of the letters were focused on, you need to do something. He was calling it out, the president and the vice president. And we made a field trip there. The children were really excited about sending the letters. A few months later, we received a reply back. And yeah, so this is just to illustrate some of the things about child view versus authority and versus the land, like who, why, and who is in the land, what is the perceived power. Yeah.
Can I share a little bit? Is it okay if I interrupt? I remember when I was coming into this space as a new employee and walking into that room and children handing me a book to read and having them just be so excited when they found out that I was Crow. And they were like, wow, so you understand this? And I said, well, I understand some of it. And I let them know that, giving them that knowledge that yes, I am, but this is a different tribe, so they could tell, so they could understand that. But their genuine absorption of it was it was so pure and beautiful. And it just goes to show that, just having it a part of the environment makes it just so natural. And they just naturally were becoming, it absorbed into everything and taking power in it. It was just a beautiful thing to see when I walked into your space. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
I'm wondering, as you're talking about storytelling and oral stories, how do you help children understand that there are different tribes and different ways of identifying as Indigenous? Assuming that, if Theresa said that you walked into a room and you started reading a story, and the story, I don't know if it was in Crow or not, but how do you help children understand that not all Indigenous or all Native cultures are the same, and that there are lots of differences between that?
Well, for me,
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, for me, it was actually specifically the book that was handed to me. It was about the water protectors. They were all about the water protectors at that moment, and I was able to share a little bit about my knowledge of what was happening in the Dakota area, so that they could understand that, we're in Washington, and you guys had a map in the room, so I was able to walk over and share them that. I think it was just giving them some visuals and being able to let them see that. We talked about vacations, it was a lot of bringing what they understood of, oh, you've been to Hawaii's over here, you had to take a plane, so this is over here. I remember having conversations like that, and then talking about that still it's our job to take care of Mother Earth, and that, so that they kind of found their self in it too. So
yeah, very similar to what I was going to say. And I think we talk a lot about, these children, and a lot of the families are privileged that these children have been on airplanes and travel a lot already by the age of 3. So when talking about different places and different lands, they had a somewhat of a, physical or mental memory of what that looks like to dislocate to different areas. And oftentimes I would share about my experiences in Brazil, right? It's far. So I think also talking about this different, not only people, but different lands with different trees and plants and people. And I think that we have at the map too as well. But I think just ongoing conversations about that difference.
Thank you.
I think for me, ways that I kind of, when I try to talk to kids about, I mean, I work with infants, but I step into a lot of different rooms. And so I've had small conversations with some of the other older kids that are more verbal, and ways that I try to, similar to how Paty mentioned, distinctive environment differences, as well as like food. Food is a big thing for me. And so I always talk about the different foods that Indigenous people may have had in their different locations. Being that I come from a tribe that's a plains tribe who were mainly hunters and gatherers, and growing up in the Pacific Northwest, where I grew up more with like salmon and fishing and things like that, I have a different perspective when talking to kids. And I try to like incorporate my knowledge of what I've learned growing up here in comparison to like my knowledge growing up back home when I go to visit family, and how different it is. And yeah. I kind of also, when bringing up like the anti-bias library, I wanted to kind of talk about kind of like representation that you may find in some of the books that you may share with students, and the importance of making sure that it's accurate representation of Indigenous people and sharing the diversity, touching back on that question of like sharing like the diversity, making sure that like you're incorporating books from different cultures that, like we said, like in Canada, have Indigenous people that may have a different culture than the Indigenous people in Mexico or in Brazil. And so making sure that there's that diversity, as well as the type of conversations that are happening, that they are making sure that you're highlighting positive and inspiring Indigenous people, and not solely focusing on some of the traumatic events that may be happening currently in the world, because for students, this may be their only way of learning of Indigenous people. And if it's solely the negative aspects, then these are the only perspectives that they're getting. So I often try to introduce different photographers that may be sharing more modern, contemporary people in modern day outfits, rather than sharing a past look that Indigenous people had, because what that does is it makes Indigenous people look like they aren't in this present time. And we want to make sure that we're letting students know that they're here now. I also, sorry, very nervous. This is my first presentation.
Doing great.
As well as making sure that you're incorporating history that's told from an Indigenous perspective, and not from a perspective that has been maybe translated, or from a white perspective or whitewash perspective, or their biases that may give the wrong knowledge to a student. You guys want to add on to that?
I was actually going to share also, like, not making Indigenous people so exotic. I think that that's one of the you know, like teaching that a lot of the older pictures, things that you might find could be ceremonial regalia that was used to portray them in that moment. Like Geneva said, there's foods around the world, just making sure that you're bringing those things in and using that as a learning tool, as opposed to this is how Indigenous people ate, making it seem like we're like almost make believe, like Disney-ish, you know. So
And also I want to add to not put on Indigenous people to like explain things to you or to give you knowledge as an expectation. Oh, I know they're Indigenous, so let me grab you real quick. Let me ask you all these things about, no, just checking. I think there's also this, don't make assumptions that because one identify as Indigenous that they're, you know, they will be the ones sharing the knowledge with you around those things. Right, Theresa? We talk about that.
yeah, I did, Becky, I saw that there's a question in there about how someone is a good way to ask. I really just love when people ask, there's a question asking about how do you find out how people want to be referred to if they're Indigenous. I just the respectful, you know, how do you want me to call you? What do you refer to yourself as? Because I get it all the time. So are you Native American? Are you Indigenous? Are you this? Are you that? Instead of saying, what do you want to be called? I mean, even with Paty and Geneva, I think I learned more during this training about both of them and how they wanted to be referred to. And I've spent lots of time with them. So just asking, just very, I mean, I think the most respectful way is just to openly just ask in that, because people can tell when people are being very just coming with compassion and really having a need to know. And we know. I don't know if you guys wanted to share something.
I agree. Yes, I agree. I think that we can tell when someone's coming from a respectful way of wanting to know us and our experiences versus what is almost like or just wanting to take it instead.
Yeah, I think also, Geneva, you had a thought that you wanted to share about taking on something. I just think it's important to share that.
I kind of just wanted to like state that when we were kind of discussing putting this presentation together, something that kind of came up a lot was making sure that when you are learning and sharing Indigenous knowledge and cultural traditions, that as a non-Indigenous person, making sure that you're giving credit to and validating the voices of those that you gain that knowledge from, and not assuming it as your own knowledge. And because our knowledge comes from the generations before us and, you know, the people, and so it tells our story, and so taking on that story as your own can be hurtful when you're teaching about Indigenous ways.
Yeah. That goes also alongside the next slide. Another piece of working with children is the power of using words. And we place a lot of value into having honest, authentic conversations with children, seeing them as the wholeness of who they are as they show up every day at school. And the idea of power versus empowering, right? And I think as adults, sometimes we might think that we hold so much power because of the ability to speak or to convey things. And I think through stories, right? Through oral stories, we also added a lot of what are the words, what are the concepts, what are the things that are really important for children. So we had a lot of conversations around what is it in your heart? What is something that you really value as a child, as a 3 to 5 year old, which was my classroom at that time. So by recognizing what is truly in their hearts, we then they were able to pull from those values on a daily basis. So we'll be sitting in meetings and in circle time and talk about what is in your heart, what is something that is really important to you every time you come to school or outside school. So they would say things like love and fairness and healing. Like healing was a word that we use it a lot in my classroom, and protect and being kind and trust. So after a few months, those concepts, those feelings, they are really kind of ingrained into children to a point where they will be calling each other out if they're not being fair or equitable or kind. And once we were diving into more deep conversations about race or indigenous culture, they were able to gravitate towards those more complex terms too. So, and it was like on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think one of the things is like, how do we heal and weave healing principles into our school culture? I think what Paty just described is such a way to give power to children for their own emotional expression. I think sometimes we feel like children as young as she had don't understand, or it's too big of a concept for them to understand, but giving them that power with those words and hearing them use those words, being able to express their own experience with their own voice by giving them the vocabulary and focusing not just on, words like, space and science, but actually social justice vocabulary so that they can start doing the work that we want, right? The next generation of the healing. I think also when we're trying to add those healing principles, like making sure that we educate ourselves that I think one of the most important things that anybody that's on here that works with children knows that as we're working with children, we're healing ourselves from whatever our childhood was lacking, right? I feel like with every educator that I've ever met, there's a reason why we do this work. And so just educating yourself and constantly having the growth mindset. And a part of adding those healing principles is having relationships with the family so that families know that this is the work that we're doing. And thinking about that what your intent is when you're teaching these things to the children and what impact it's going to have, and being ready for that. I think as we tell our story about what the project that we did, the impact and the intent, I think really lined up well together, but being ready for that impact and how are we going to respond to it, and looking for resources. I think that we all have connections with people that can be our resources to help us. They don't have to exactly be an education for them to be a resource for us to heal within this realm of Indigenous healing. Sorry, turned my microphone off and I didn't realize that, sorry. And speaking of that, I think that I guess we're ready to go into this, Paty. You ready to relive? One of the things that happened is the discovery of the 215 Indigenous, the grave of the unmarked grave. And for me, myself, and the moment that I heard the news, I had an overload of emotion. I was actually sitting here in the office when I had read it, and then I might get emotional, sorry. I had such a big feeling of sorrow, confusion, and I guess grief. And I knew that it was a validation that our truth was being undiscovered. And I knew that it was only one of many, many, many unmarked graves. And I just, in that moment, I sat here and there was people in the office, and one of the women that worked with me was sitting next to me. She's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I need to do something. I don't know what it is, but I have this need to do something." And I said, I don't know what it is that I need to do, but I have to do something, and it has to be with the children here. Like, it has to be something for me to pass on. And for me in that moment, I was like, how am I going to make a difference? How am I going to do something just for myself to feel like I can heal? Because if I can heal, even if it's one child, and for me, I wanted to give, I don't know, in that moment, I wasn't really sure exactly what it was I wanted to give at that moment, but I was like, how can I honor these children? And I'm going to give acknowledgement to Valerie Guerrero, who was sitting next to me, and she's like, let's do something. Let's get there. She's always a go-getter. She's like, let's do this. Let's get it. Let's go do something. We're going to make a change. And so she inspired me to reach out to, and like I said, I went into Paty's room, the river room, that the teaching team there was already doing work. So it was natural to go and say, hey, let's do something. And Paty, I knew, shared the same sorrow, the same grief, the same feeling, the same probably need as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I felt in that moment. And so, I mean, I think we sat down and the question was just like, what are we going to do? How do we make this a reality here within our walls here at Hilltop? And yeah, we were already doing, you guys were already doing the work around the water protectors. They understood. And I think from there, it just, this beautiful thing happened. So it's kind of how this project started. And I just wanted to give a backstory to how it started.
Yeah. And as Theresa and I, we sat together and we talk and we reflect, and we also process together what we are going to do and how are you feeling. And I think one of the ideas was to open the conversation with children first. And I think there was a lot of trust too involved in the process. It was trust between the two of us, trust in our leadership team to back us up, trust in the children that they were going to be able to sit with that information with us. And I think because we've been working with those children on many, many important things on a daily basis, I think at that time, I knew that I could trust them with this and they could trust us into leaning into this work. So I brought the book When We Were Alone by David Robertson from the Cree Nation, and it was illustrated by Julie Flatt. She's a Cree Métis Nation. And as I was reading, I did talk to them about, yes, there are 215 Indigenous children's bodies were found buried in unmarked graves. So I told them I want to share something very important to me, and I want them to really listen. And then after I said that, I read the book and then I said that. So I could tell in their faces, those 3 to 5 year old faces, they were hit by such sadness and sorrow and confusion themselves. And I think we had a conversation right there and then about it. And I think throughout our conversation that morning, some of them were like, but what can we do? What can we do? Can we do something? And I think some of the children were just like adults. Sometimes they want to do something right away, and some of the children were not quite ready because their processing time is just different than some other children. Some children really, I want to do something, and then some other children are like, yes, but I still need time to process this. And in some of the discussions, I don't know if you can see here in the slide, they themselves start having ideas about, and is when I kind of step back and I just try to listen to their own conversation and try to give them some support, but it was just coming from them. So one child was like, but we're only children, what can we do? And to that child, other children response was, no, we can do something. Remember when we wrote a letter to the president? Remember when we did this? Remember when we did that? We can do something. So I started writing down what are your ideas about this? And some of the ideas were mark their graves, because having not a place for them to rest and for families and people to go was something important. They would like to write letters to the families and drawings. They also like to send, let me see if I can see here. They send money. They saying that they have a piggy bank at home, and instead of purchasing a toy, they said that they want to give all the money in their piggy bank to the family. So I think they have different ideas. And we just start, and then Theresa and I started just building on these ideas. So in the next slide, also made sure there was enough opportunities for processing, and anytime really heavy information comes to children's ways, I always want to make sure they have different channels for processing, just as much as I need ways of processing. And one way that we talk about this is a circle of control, which I like to do myself, and I also like to introduce to children. So sometimes when there's this big things happening in the world, I think I noticed some of the children say, well, we cannot do anything, we're just children. And I think understanding where is your circle of influence about what you can do as a child and what is outside, and don't worry about it right now. So we sat together and we talk about things that they themselves felt that they could do it, to empower them. So they came up with all these words in the slide, is all the words, and I wrote it down. And I think during this process, they felt even more empowered. So those children that before were like, I'm not sure, I'm unsure what to do, they felt more of a sense of, I don't know, determination or purpose. And on the other picture, and I don't know if you can see very well, but as the pictures of icebergs, and a lot of the children, just like me, were sitting with anger and sorrow. And we try to understand a little bit about how to identify and what does it look like. So on the top of the iceberg, and I was explaining to them, if you see in the picture, the iceberg, you just can usually see the tip of the iceberg, but actually it's larger on the bottom, right? So the same thing with emotions. Sometimes we present ourselves in a way that looks like we're angry, but actually underneath in your heart, we have some other feelings. And then I connected back to the heart value cat. What is in your heart? So they already have some vocabulary. So we just start building up, and they were so natural with it. So I had students say, yeah, I look angry, but actually I'm hungry. I look angry, but actually I'm tired, or they just are confused. And so we gave, again, more opportunities for processing and digesting information.
Yeah.
There's a great question in the chat, Geneva, Theresa, and Paty, from Elena. Could you provide some guidance on how you were having these conversations with parents and families who don't want us to expose children to the realities of the world? How did you address this topic with families?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit in a future slide. It is one of our things that we will hit. That's a great question. That's one of the harder ones. But yeah, we will hit that in like, I think in 3 slides. Thank you.
Yes, so we're just gonna take maybe 10 minutes 10, 12 minutes moment to, go in small groups and do a little bit of a reflection and share in a discussion what kind of hard conversations activities makes you feel uncomfortable yourself, and how would you turn a hard conversation into an opportunity for learning?
Thanks. Becky,
Yeah.
could you make that happen?
We use the magic of Zoom. How many folks would you like in each breakout room?
If we're doing about 12 minutes, maybe like 3, 4.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you guys. And thank you for the questions in the chat. Like I said, we don't have all the answers, but we can give our experience and hopefully give you a little bit of guidance on something to do or a way to differently think about something.
All right, we're going to try 8 here. Okay. Okay, I think we have everybody back in the main room now. Paty, Geneva, and Theresa, were you hoping to do a whole group share out or move on to the next component?
No, I don't think we did, but I hope everybody got to speak a little bit of, with their group. I had an amazing group that we had some wonderful conversation. That's all my hope was for this, is that you were able to have a conversation and share a little bit.
Wonderful. We are a little past the first hour. Traditionally, we do take, a 3-ish minute break just so folks can go to the bathroom, refresh their beverage, stretch. How do y'all feel about doing that at this moment? Okay, wonderful. So please go take care of yourself on a quick break. While you're doing that, I'm going to drop the link again in the chat to the sign-in sheet so that you can sign in for STARS hours or certificate. If that link doesn't work, please just message me privately. Okay, have a good little break, everybody. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share screen again so we can get back to our slideshow.
Onto the branches.
Okay, can you all see the screen? Awesome.
So we're gonna move on to the branches, and this is like how can we have young students like participate? Are they too young? How are these? Oh, I think we moved on to the next slide. And so I kind of wanted to just share how I, in an infant room, share my culture with them. And so some of the things that I've done to incorporate is introducing books by Indigenous authors, as well as books that show a variety, how I've mentioned, a variety of diverse Indigenous groups. And as well as like the clothing that I wear, since a lot of my infants are nonverbal. um, Everything they're exploring with their eyes, their hands. And so I like to wear a lot of clothing that either has images or ribbon skirts that have detailing on them that may spark some kind of like visual interest, as well as jewelry. The babies love the shiny things that I wear. And so these are ways that I'm incorporating my culture and introducing them to explore these visual things that they may not have been introduced to outside of Hilltop or outside of my classroom. I wanted to share kind of like an example of how, even though we may think that it's not doing much, the little things do a lot. And so from my experience, I've had I was working with a 1-year-old who was in my infant room before and last year, and I would wear a lot of my powwow sweaters because I may have a problem with hoarding sweaters. And a lot of these sweaters will have like horses or teepees, things that just share a part of like the plains culture from where my tribe is from. And so one of the kiddos in the class would always point to these things, and these were some of the words that, you know, I would share, you know, one word, a teepee, and he would repeat it. And every time I would wear similar shirts, he would, you know, point out these different images and continue to repeat them. And just recently, I've stepped into the classroom that he's in now, and I was wearing a sweater with that he's familiar with, and pointed out the teepee and would like say it. And so now that he was a little bit more verbal, I was able to open up communication on the differences of houses that Indigenous people may have lived in, making sure that I let him know like a teepee was what my people may have lived in, but here in the Pacific Northwest, it was something, a different type of house, a cedar house, a plank house, or that in a different part of the United States or a different part of North America, they may have, Indigenous people lived in different types of houses. So I was able to kind of like share these different Indigenous knowledges with him solely on like the images that I had on with my clothing. I don't know if someone else wanted to add on to that.
I know that the question is my child too young to participate? There was the question that was in the chat that I was going to try to just give, and Paty and Geneva, you can step in as if you'd like to, but I think one of the importance is knowing the children that you are building that relationship with the families, right? So that when they are in your classroom, they already know what kind of educator you are. I think making sure that you're scaffolding so that the children are able to absorb what you say. Like you can read from a book, but if the children don't understand what's being said, it defeats the purpose. Giving that goes back to that that Western way of giving information, right? Like they're not actually touching the shirt or touching the ribbon skirt or the earrings that you have on your ears. It's more of a given thing. So making sure that you're scaffolding and knowing the children that you're working with, and being ready for those reactions from the families. I think one of the amazing things that we're blessed with here at Hilltop is we do have leadership that has our back. I mean, that's basically what it is. It's work that is supported, and it's in our mission statement, it's in our values, it's a part of our first introductions when families, like we've been having fall gatherings, and I know that yesterday, I think Geneva, your classroom had a fall gathering, and you talked about that social justice, anti-bias work, and let parents know that, you know, you're going to have things in the classroom, but it's their job as parents to be on board of what it is. Of course, you might get a family that is like, that's kind of a scary thing to talk about, but just reassuring them that you're giving it as childcare experts and professionals in the work that we do, we're giving it to them at the amount that they can absorb. I think like when we go a little bit on, Paty will talk a little bit more about how that happened for her in a couple of different activities. But also having staff and peer co-educators that have the same value system as you and have the same goal. I think that had I not had someone sitting next to me saying, hey, Theresa, what do you need from me? And that question alone opened up so much. Just to have people that you can sit and talk with. Me and Paty had lots of conversations. It wasn't just like she said, it wasn't just a let's do this, I want to do this, because it really was about how are we going to make the most impact, and what is our intent, what is our goal. And when you explain that kind of stuff to the families and you have that stuff already in your head, so that when families do come to you and they do say, I don't mind if you talk about this. I think one of the things that I think it was Elena that had that question in the chat, how do you talk about things without giving the content of why it's happening? In that statement alone, you have the power to say this is why, and this is important that we do it. So I think just having the confidence and making sure that you know what you're talking about, so that when you do get approached by families and that uncomfortableness, you're just ready for it. I mean, I think for me, when we started this, there were a lot of families that came to us, and I think it was more older children that the families were that hadn't really been with us for a very long time. But I mean, I had to like stop and say, do you know what you're saying to me right now as an Indigenous person is really breaking my heart, because this is what I have had to deal with my whole life. And giving them that impact of what it had on me, a couple of families had to like just step back and go, that's not what my intent was, I'm so sorry. And having them understand that feeling of, I don't get to change being Indigenous, only 2 or 3 months out of the year, when it's that time that they usually, are celebrated. Like it's my whole life. So just being able to being real and compassionate with the families. So I don't know, Paty, if you want to step in or share anything about that. So I just wanted to share that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of something to work with when you're dealing with the families. I shouldn't say dealing with, that's such a negative word. Interacting and engaging with families to empower yourself and them.
Yeah, and it was, as you were saying, it was making me think too that, we are talking about grief and we're talking about healing and sorrow. So we're talking about emotional, humans' emotions too with children. So I think it's just one way to talk to families about this is that they will engage in those emotions throughout their lives. And the way we are doing in a classroom is just one way for them to have the ability and the opportunity to understand what does it look like. It's just another learning opportunity for children to engage in those feelings that are happening and will be happening to them. I think is also one way that I like to talk to families about that. If there's pushback. So for this specific topic of, okay, is my child too young to participate? So as the work we were doing, Theresa and I, in my classroom, and my co-teacher too, that there was ripple effect. So other classrooms start hearing about, they were excited to join, they didn't know how to. So I was approached by one of the educators in that 1-year-old classroom that he was really excited, but he didn't know exactly how to approach this. And I actually turned the question to my students, to my kids, and say, what do you think? How do you think the kids in Cloud Room can do this work just like you're doing? Because in my room, children are already like thinking of, we're already working on a plaque for making a memorial in your playground garden for the children. We are working on in the letters and the drawing. So my children are already actively working on things they wanted to do through this work. And so my students and my kids had this idea about, well, how about we go to their classroom and we read some books that we have to them? And I was like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So I took two of my students, and we talked to the 1-year-old teachers. So we found a time. So my kids went there, and and they picked the books they wanted to read, and they read together. And those children were 5, so they were, already reading books. And then after that, they had a discussion there in Cloud Room with the teachers saying, oh, maybe they can do some painting. Because my kids wanted to send letters and drawings and painting to the families of the families in Canada. And they said, well, maybe they can do some painting and they can send it together. Or maybe they can do some painting and decorate the altar, because we also wanted to build an altar in our school, right? And so this is how things unfolded for that class. So if you see in the picture, they were playing some Coast Salish songs while they're painting. They revisit some of the books later on. The other classrooms, they wanted to learn some of the songs. So I oftentimes sing some of the songs that I grew up with or had been shared and I had permission to share too with my kids. So I got to, sing with other children too. And I think the work started unfolding throughout the organization at that point. Right, Theresa?
Yeah, I also want to point out this was all happening during COVID. It was really important for us to build the community during a time where we were so separated. Like this was a time, I don't know if you guys recall, we weren't able to go into other classrooms. Teachers weren't able to go into other rooms at the time. It was when we were very in our bubbles is what we called them. And so when the music was playing down the hallway, it was just beautiful because like kids' heads were popping out the doors, like, what's that? So at a time that the world was really like shut off from each other, the building, and I felt like inside our building, we were building this beautiful community without even knowing it was happening, right? Yeah, I just wanted to share that part because I was like, ooh, it was COVID.
Theresa and Paty, I'm sorry. I just also wanted to chime in from a parent perspective in this area, because I think it's important as all of you are thinking about how you're introducing Indigenous culture into your classroom and the resistance that you're going to get in this. Theresa mentioned that this was during COVID when our classrooms were very isolated. This was also a time when our family community was less involved in our organization. It was a time when parents weren't allowed into the space. And so there was this sort of mystery about what was happening behind closed doors with their children. And so the bravery that had to happen and the conversations that needed to be had with families to explain what was happening in a way that they also understood, because they couldn't see what impacts were happening with children in the space. And so to have these really deep, meaningful, intense conversations come up and parents being like, wait, what are you teaching my children about? And how are you doing that? And at that added layer of how are you doing that in a way that's going to keep my child safe, that they're not coexisting in other spaces. So this was multi-layered in its complexity, but yet it still happened in a very meaningful, genuine, impactful way. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
And then I'll throw back the gratitude of you always having our backs, I guess, and being able to back up our work that we were doing and knowing that it was meaningful to everybody involved. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I second that too. And and if you go to the next slide, again, this also we have an emergent curriculum, and this is a part of the curriculum that it kept emerging and changing and unfolding. And one of the things that we thought about it was to make an altar. And they already had a concept of altar because of the ways I have been introducing throughout the year. Is a space for healing and is a space for ceremony and reflection and honoring. So children are very serious about having the altar and being a place where people could go there. So it was collective effort to have an altar that would be honoring those children. So it was not only my students, but other students and other teachers and the leadership team. We all put together an altar in kind of
in the entryway. So it was visible. It was still kind of hard because it still was, we
Yeah.
weren't letting families in, but it was visible
Mhm.
from the window to a
Yeah.
certain point.
And at that point, families were engaging, and the families of my children, they were super engaged into the work we were doing. I grateful I did not receive pushback in this work that I did with this classroom. And I wonder, because of all the work being done up to that moment, and I think families were interested in what can I do? How can I get more involved? And so then there was the moment of like, okay, let's see, how can we involve the families? And again, it was a conversation with children. So what do you think? How do you think your family wants to be involved in this? So their idea is like, oh, I'd like to have a memorial garden. It was their idea to have in our school and at home. So then we start having some parents connect to each other and say, okay, how about I take this piece of researching about native plants and native flowers, so we can I can buy the seeds, or I can buy the soil, and we can do this. So I had some parents on that piece, and then had other parents that Theresa had this idea to have the shoes, right? If you want to talk a little bit more about that, and a lot of parent engagement around that from different places too.
Yeah, I think for me, I had seen a couple of the pictures and things around the country of people laying shoes down to remember these children. And so in my heart, it was, I want to put shoes on children. And so it was kind of an idea that I had, but I gave it to the children to, how are we going to get these? How are we going to make this happen? And there was just an outpour. My goal was 215. We surpassed it. It came from community members, families, I mean, local community members. There were national from across New York and Connecticut. We got shoes, and we also got some shoes from Paty, who it was the lady in Canada that actually had a cousin was it her cousin?
Yes.
Was one of the remains that was found, actually sent us a pair of shoes. And it turned into something so beautiful. And then my goal was to give them back into the community, and we were able to donate to the Tree House, which is a foster program here in Seattle. And I had reached out to see if they had an Indigenous children, like, just a group of Indigenous children that we could bless these shoes to, and they did. And of course for all of them, but I really wanted it intended to go on to the resilience and the carrying on of our the ones that are still here. Also the Seattle Indian Health Board's WIC program, which is a community that I go there for my care. So it was a community that I've been blessed to have around me. Yeah, and the children that, like, on the altar, like the kids that talked about their piggy banks, and a child actually, if in that picture, you can see where one of the children is holding up the shoes. There's a little container back there that was their piggy bank from home that they had change in, that they brought in, and people just started putting money in there, and to reach our goal. We reached it, but we still continued to buy more shoes. And yeah, and then I didn't talk a little bit about the orange sweater.
Oh yeah, and we work on the garden memorial too. So we plant. We had a ceremony where we plant. We also did a ceremony. If you want to go to the next slide too.
Yeah,
That
Becky was a part of getting the.
Yeah, the plaque.
Becky, if you want to talk a little bit about what you did for the garden, because.
Sure. Well, I was honored that I was invited to participate in this. It was really important to me to follow the lead of you all on this project. So I was invited to help participate in the garden. So my role was, I just helped children collect artwork that they had created for the families in Canada, expressing their sadness, expressing that they don't want this to ever happen again. And just condensed those into just a temporary sign that lives in the garden, marking it as a memorial garden. So anyone who walks past that garden on our play yard, any of the new children and families that come into that space know the energy of that garden and what it was intended to be. And Theresa and I were just chatting that the intention was to have a permanent plaque there. And with life and the realities of COVID, I never took that final step to get that permanent plaque up. So this workshop has been great inspiration to take that next step and get that permanent plaque attached to that garden bed.
Yeah, and we had the garden, like the celebration, right? The ceremony. We'll also bless the shoes. So Theresa and I and a few of our children smudged and bless the shoes before we send them. And just because of the sake of the time that I'm looking here, I'm just gonna briefly talk about the sweaters. We also talk about Philly's orange shirt book. And let's see, it was written by Phyllis Webstad from the Canoe Creek Indian Nation, and one of our educators were helping do some sewing and some knitting about on the orange sweaters. And one of our educators actually is in the call here, Jill, and she was able to travel to Canada and bring the sweaters to our point of contact, which was great. And if you go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm gonna pass on to
Okay.
Lisa.
I think this is where we were just going to reflect a little bit about what does healing, justice, and competency mean to me through this work. And what we were realizing is that we're kind of each a generation younger, I being the eldest. I'll say it, it's okay. And so I just wanted to I guess kind of reflect a little bit about the healing and the justice and the competency in this. And one of the things that makes me very proud right now is I grew up on an Indian reservation in Montana, on the Crow Indian reservation, and moved here to, I guess, do the job of enlightening children, and found out that this is what it makes my heart grow. And being able to share my life experiences and hopefully do some healing has healed myself. One of I guess one of the things that I can look at is, if you haven't noticed, Geneva's last name is my same last name. So being here, sitting in the same space with my daughter, knowing that she is able to be proud of who she is. Sorry, I knew I wasn't going to do this part. And just being able to be on this conversation with her, and her sharing the knowledge that she has and her strength of herself, it shows the work that I'm doing is truly worth it. Yep.
And that for me, healing, justice, and competency, and this work took months, right? And I don't know, we shared this, but I think, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months, or even more, even longer. And to me, it was a very healing and experience. At the same time, it was hard, but I think because the healing piece, it was supposed to be hard. And I think part of me got healed, part of me is still not. And I think it is also part of the work. And it was a really humbled experience to do that with children, to be able to be alongside them and to co-create all of that. So it was really an honor to me to do this work with them and to participate in that moment. And also personally, I think professionally, yes, and more even so personally for me as being white presenting, I have a lot of feelings about maybe I'm not indigenous enough, maybe I'm not Kayapon enough, maybe I shouldn't be the one doing this work. And I think the more I do this work, excuse me, the more I feel that no, I am who I am, and I shouldn't be doubting, the learning that I got and my identity.
And for me, healing, justice, and competency, healing for me is, I think I'm still going through my healing, but making sure that I have like my relationships with my family, being that I am far away from both of my Indigenous backgrounds, and so making sure that I have a connection to my family and my culture, and feeling like I am a part of it, being so far, as well as seeing myself and my culture and the world around me as, um, being there all the time and not just coming up in conversations around certain seasons because it happens to be the time of year, um, or as well as um, like justice and the protection of, you know, our Indigenous cultures and knowledges, as well as like understanding that everyone's experiences as an Indigenous person are valid and are going to look different. So for me, it's still like a process that I'm going through, being that I'm so much younger, and still learning a lot more about who I am as an Indigenous person. There was a question that I wanted to address before we run out of time, since I'm talking right now. Bonnie asked, how could we introduce culture through clothing if we're not Indigenous, without committing cultural appropriation? And that you were given beautiful earrings. It's always an honor to be gifted earrings, especially if they were hopefully made by a person. I myself am a beader, and so that's how one of the ways that I kind of connect with my Indigenous culture. And I think for me as a beader, I gift my earrings out a lot to people, as my way of like sharing my respect with them and my just honoring them as a person, a part of my life. And so I think that wearing and sharing Indigenous culture, even as a non-Indigenous culture, if you're doing it in a way that, again, giving credit to the person and knowing the story behind it, is really important, and that it isn't cultural appropriation if you're doing it in that way, honoring the people that give it to you and where it comes from. um yeah, hopefully that answers that a little bit, because it is a very common question that comes up when it comes to jewelry or even clothing. um yeah.
All right. Okay, just for further learning, I think this is just going to be, we're going to leave on a think about it. Is that kind of what we were thinking, Paty? Just kind of take a moment to think about how would you make space for the children in your life to sit with uncomfortable truths? It's a big, deep question. But if you don't have the question to answer, you can answer it. So it's good to have something to think like about. And how will you hold yourself accountable in doing important work of decolonizing and redesigning the spaces you navigate for liberation? I don't know if anybody out there wants to share if they have any ideas, but just we want to leave you guys on that. I don't know if you want to add anything, Paty.
Yeah, or if you have something you can share in the
In
chat.
the chat.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself. I think we have about 10 minutes, and we just want to give the space to either you want to reflect back with us, or you have a question, or yeah.
Becky, do you mind stop sharing so we could see people's faces during this part of the conversation? all of a
Well,
sudden everyone's shy.
I'll just read those questions again, just so folks have them at the top of mind. How would you make space for children in your life to sit with uncomfortable truths? Oh, Pachi's got them right there. Thank you, Pachi. And how will you hold yourself accountable in doing the important work of decolonizing and redesigning the spaces that you navigate for liberation?
There are some responses in the chat. Someone says, I love the idea of doing this every day, stepping back and thinking about this as I begin each day. And then it looks like somebody else said, I think one of the first things to do is making space for children to hold uncomfortable truth is being willing to hold them ourselves, which I think is beautiful.
Very true. Yeah. I think it goes back to like making sure that the purpose behind what you're doing, like you have that purpose and you understand. And in my group, Bonnie talked about the humility. We need humility to be able to do this work. I wanted to share that, Bonnie, because that was a beautiful thing.
I can share. Hi,
Go for it, Jill.
everyone. I'm Jill. I also work at Hilltop Children's Center in a 3 to 5 room with the mountain kids. And I really love this topic because it especially relates to the work that we're doing in our classroom right now. And when Indigenous Peoples Day was coming around, it actually landed on the same day as Canadian Thanksgiving, and I am Canadian, and so I went home. And as thinking about that, I had a meeting with our kids about just opening up the basics of why should we honor Indigenous Peoples Day? Why do we have it off? Why are you not at school? Just the basics of it. And I did that in a way just by using simple like toys around the classroom to role play the basics of what happened, of how land was stolen from Indigenous peoples and tribes. And the visualization of the simplicity of that was very eye-opening to them. And I wrote a document recently, and it's going to be ongoing, of like, at the end of the day, land was stolen from these people and they know that it isn't right. And so laying down the basics and foundation to understand complex ideas that even we as adults are still learning about and their parents are still curious about, but also don't have the knowledge to go further. I think it's really important for us to understand the power that we have as educators to share that simple knowledge with them and to encourage parents to keep on raising awareness to these bigger issues and the realities that are really important to know. And as someone with a co-educator who was kind of worried to touch on a topic because they didn't want to do it the wrong way, or they didn't want to offend, or just not do it right. I think the importance is taking the step to do the work, because it's not going to benefit anyone if we're just going to shy away from it, just like other bigger topics that we cover, whether it's pride or something else, or spiritual or religious issues or topics. So I'm just gonna put that there. And I just want to say thank you so much to the presenters for this important work. And it's really inspiring, especially in our classroom right now.
Well, you inspired me, so I'll share too. My name is Laura. I also work at Hilltop. I do after school care for 5 to 12-year-olds. So it is nice because we can really get deep into topics. And I think my biggest takeaway from this is instead of going from like Indigenous Day to another day to another day and getting kind of shallow projects in there. And I feel like we're always doing a lot with science and social studies and all the things, just like really dig deep and get to like the core of the why. And I invite my coworkers to like push me to do there, to like get in there.
Thank you so much, Laura and Jill, for sharing with us on microphone. We do have a few more great comments in the chat here. Let's see, incorporating the heart cat and anger iceberg activities. Learning some reflective vocabulary for social justice, modeling and inviting that vulnerability and risk taking, which Jill, you were really speaking to. And Tess talks about how she turns to her elders for advice and wisdom. They tell me to do more, if not then, if not now, or if not them who, if not now, when. So I embed Indigenous teachings into my lesson plans daily, whether we're inside, outside, circle time, lunch, etc. We went on a field trip, marched through downtown to City Hall, singing and drumming with our Native community, sang a song for our people inside City Hall before gathering for lunch. Thank you, Tess. Any final words of appreciation or commitments or ideas that you'll be taking with you after this workshop?
Hi, I'm Katie. I just wanted to say thank you both to Theresa and Paty too. I think that one of the hard thing is like people like even when they're like doing these like lockdown drills and things is people are worried that children won't understand this, but I think that was such a good point as this gives them the tools to process the human emotions of sorrow and grief, which they will. And Theresa, your point that you're Indigenous, you don't get to turn this off, you don't get to, it's so important to remember. And so I think that's really helpful to like, you know, just trust them, like you said, just trust the children and that they can, and that you're working with them to learn how to do the healing and do that. So I wanted to say thank you for that, just that initial step of realizing that how important it is for them. So thank you.
I wanted to say thanks, Theresa, Geneva, Paty. I feel so grateful that I get to work with you. And today, I appreciate all the effort, the thought, the love and care you put in to providing this presentation for us. And it's a huge reminder, the resource that I have available to me every day from the three of you and all the other people, not only at Hilltop, but in our larger education community. So I really appreciate that reminder for me to tap into all the wisdom that's available right around us. Thanks.
Thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. Yeah, I want to thank my co-presenters too. It was a joy getting ready for this. And I also want to remind you, there are a lot of people out there that identify as Indigenous, and it's, you know, like I said, just asking people. The assumption that Indigenous people look a certain way, Paty talked about that, like we you know, and within even my own siblings, I have a sister who's blonde hair, blue eyed, but is from the same mother. And so like just asking those questions, and I think it's okay to ask people, what do you identify as? You know, you're going to get whatever open-ended question that comes with that, right? And you might find a network or a resource just in asking that question, just getting to know somebody. We all have stories, and what we bring is beautiful to share in the classroom. So I just wanted to share that as well, that, you know, I may not have all resources for myself, but until I actually step out and talk to people, I'm going to gain those resources just in person.
Thank you so much, Theresa. Before we close, Paty and Geneva, any final words that you'd like to share?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was my first presentation, and so I was very nervous. And I am hoping to get better at my presenting skills.
You were awesome, Geneva.
You're awesome. And yeah, thank you all. And to my co-presenters, is an honor again to sit with you and to be able to talk about this, and it's just a journey of just having those meetings and be able just to be the three of us and just sharing that or similar but different experiences and feelings, and is something that I'm gonna be emotional about. It's something that it makes me feel like my heart feels warm, and I think that is the feeling that I'm feeling right now too. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, the three of you, Geneva, Paty, Theresa, for such a beautiful, inspiring, powerful workshop today. I'm walking away with just thinking more deeply about the power of bringing values work to children. I'm so inspired by how you did that in your classroom, Paty. And just a reminder of being courageous, doing this work knowing that we're probably going to make mistakes. We can't possibly know everything and do it exactly right, but it's necessary. It's part of the healing for us to bring that courage. So thank you everyone for being here, for staying on a few minutes after with us. We have another event coming up next Saturday with Rosetta Lee. Speaking of courage, how do you have these kinds of conversations with colleagues and families, with the adults in your life? So please come join us for Safe to Brave Courageous Conversations next Saturday. And just wishing you all a restorative and nurturing weekend. And thank you all so much for the work you do. Take care, everybody.